Hi, I'm PJ Kwong for SGS Live, and in today's session, we're headed into timely and topical territory, namely supply chain, and how to build agility into your organization when facing volatility and ambiguity. This uncertainty has driven companies to prioritize and improve transparency in their business and planning to ensure they have the right products at the right place at the right time. It has been an exhausting few years for organizations as they manage complex and sometimes deeply damaging challenges, including shutdowns of plants due to COVID, geopolitical unrest, inflation, labor shortages, shifting consumer trends, and more. With these challenges, organizations are looking for options to de-risk exposure, react quickly rather, and even predictively, which has brought sales inventory and operations planning, or better known as SIOP, into the spotlight for executives. This topic, also referred to at times as integrated business planning, is what we're going to be talking about today. Basically, let's talk finding order in chaos, safeguards for business in uncertain times. We're going to be joined by a couple of experts. First up is Jeff Staub, Chief Executive Officer for SGS Mainpoint, an SGS group member company, which is a leading management consulting firm in the end-to-end supply chain business. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, PJ. Looking forward to the discussion.
I am too. We're also going to be joined by Colin Zimmerink, Senior Managing Director for SGS Mainpoint and head of their Industrial Manufacturing and Services practice. Welcome, Colin.
Hi, PJ. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Jeff, right off the top, can you talk to me about SGS Mainpoint? What does your company specialize in?
Of course, PJ. SGS Mainpoint accelerates measurable outcomes in cost, cash, and growth for our clients across the end-to-end supply chain. We really pride ourselves on taking a cross-functional view of the organization, breaking down those business silos, and making sure we diagnose and implement practical plans to mitigate those risks and take advantage of those opportunities. We are known for working shoulder to shoulder with our clients. We don't work from the boardroom. We don't work through PowerPoint slides, and we often put skin in the game with our clients with our 100% guarantee on engagement fees. In particular, SIOP, along with strategic sourcing, operations excellence, warehousing, network strategy, they're our most common work streams across our engagements.
Yeah, if I were to add something to that, Jeff, I would say we do that with, you covered most of it, with senior people, and we combine the industry and consulting experience. That really is a differentiator. Personally, I've been working in operational consulting for the last 20 years, all across industries, globally, and currently leading the industrial manufacturing practice. As such, we have projects in the US, in Canada, Mexico, addressing those SIOP issues, ensuring deliveries. So if I look at the differentiator, the thing I would add is we have the specialists coming from industry, the consultants, the SMEs, and that group of experienced people coming together and leading our client teams together is actually one of the largest differentiators.
You know, this is going to be a super interesting conversation. And you know what? Let's get involved a little bit with our audience. So if we're going to be talking about forecasting, here's a question for the audience. I want to know, what are some of the factors that have led us to this point in our supply chain issues? If you want to play along, make sure you put your answers below in the chat. And our possibilities are: number one, uncertainty; number two, rapid changes in the marketplace; number three, the COVID-19 pandemic; and number four, all of the above. So remember, put your answers in the chat below. And the question is, what are some of the factors that have led us to where we are now with supply chain issues? Number one, uncertainty; number two, rapid changes in the marketplace; number three, the COVID-19 pandemic; number four, all of the above. Okay, Colin and Jeff, you guys can't play because you obviously know the answer. But what I want to know is, what do you think our audience is going to say?
I think they might go for all above, yeah.
What do you think, Jeff?
I thought we were still blaming millennials for everything. So I feel like we probably need a couple more options. But yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of interdependencies across that list.
Well, I think that, let's see if we can see some of our answers. And I personally would choose all of the above. Now, mind you, I wrote the question, so I kind of know the answer. But for those of you that want to know, let's see what some of our guests and some of our people have said. Number 4 from Carlos. Number 4 from Dharmendra. And let's see, anybody else? Angie Paula. Number 4. So all of the above. So basically, this is a very interesting topic and one that is resonating with our audience. So Colin, let's move to you. The art of demand and supply. The art of demand and supply planning has evolved over the last several decades, and even more over the last few years as companies face unprecedented and unexpected challenges. I mean, this is called traditional planning and collaboration methods into question. What can we expect going forward?
Yeah, good question. And you used the word more. It is more. It is more uncertainties. First of all, we will have more drivers of this uncertainty and fluctuation. We've seen the pandemic. There's a long list of shutdowns, geopolitical wars, weather, strikes, road blockages, technology changes, labor shift, taxes, tariffs, ESG, and more. And I can go on. I won't do it. So there's more factors causing uncertainty. And then there's the size of the issues, the global pandemic versus just a smaller issue, a local issue. And then even worse, they're also interconnected. When we have pandemic closures, there's labor leaving, and then we have taxes and tariffs flowing after that. So it is more complexity. And what we're depicting here is that the peaks and the valleys of the uncertainty are actually going higher and lower. So traditionally, the SIOP and forecasting has been insufficient already. We've seen that. And now going forward, it's even worse. So over time, most SIOP implementations have been kind of muddled along, driven by the group within an organization that had the strongest voice, the strongest stakeholder. But really, the issue is that everybody's involved, and we'll talk about that later. All these stakeholders need to be aligned to optimize the business versus sub-optimizing for just one area. And that's what SIOP is really, really all about. Organizations were typically not built for that, but it really comes down to aligning all those stakeholders.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Colin. And I think when you think about how important SIOP has become to the kind of the foundation of modern business, it's important to kind of first, what do we mean by SIOP? And then how do we get to this point? I think from a kind of a simple definition standpoint, it's really that thread that brings your business together from customer demand, what your business does, how does it add value, how do you serve those customers, and then how do your suppliers serve you, and what do you do to make that as efficient and effective as possible? I think in a lot of ways, SIOP is that blueprint of your business, whether it's your financials in terms of cost, cash, and revenue, your product portfolio strategy, your asset and technology roadmaps, and of course, your people strategy. So without that strong kind of SIOP foundation, you're really just reacting to previous experiences versus being proactive and planning and building your business accordingly. And when you kind of take the zoom out approach and how did it become so important to modern business, I like to think through the last couple hundred years, how business has evolved. And if you think about the step changes that we've seen, often referred to as industrial revolutions, we went from this artisan production to mechanization to production line, obviously the electricity and mobility that came along with that, to automation and digitization. I think in each of those cases, we increased that amount of useful knowledge available to organizations and individuals to drive efficiency, take advantage of marketplaces. And I think as that thread of customer, manufacturer, and supplier has become highly interdependent, complex webs, the expectations of our consumers have dramatically increased. And as you have that increase in expectation, as PJ said, getting the right product in the right place at the right time and at the right quantity, while simple to say, it's become really difficult to execute, especially with this backdrop of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity that we've seen over the last few years that has really snowballed. And I think that building that kind of inherent agility, resilience into your business requires a mature SIOP program, I think those seamless pivots are pretty immature, relatively speaking, for most companies. And we're really seeing, PSYOP, especially PSYOP underpinned by data analytics, as a huge step change in that kind of quote unquote useful knowledge that a company has to build around.
You know what, Jeff? So if we're going to stay with you for a moment, and we're talking about traditional supply and demand planning methodologies and the fact that they worked very well until they didn't, what happened?
Yeah, I think, the easy answer here is obviously the pandemic, and that obviously threw global supply chains into disarray. You saw a really significant shift in consumer patterns over a very short period of time, a true black swan event. But I think if you kind of think about businesses going into that, if you had actually prepared for that level of outcome, you would have probably paralyzed your business, pushed in a lot of cost to really manage that many different outcomes. So when you think about that, plus all the other macroeconomic factors at play that Colin mentioned, like geopolitics, inflation, labor shortages, I think this is an unprecedented moment. But if you kind of take a step back and think about the bigger trend that's been evolving here, when I talked about that useful knowledge and being more efficient, serving consumers in a different way, that increased a lot of complexity as well. When you look at the amount of specialization, you have a multi-tier supply chain, global expansion there. You have SKU proliferation, micro segmentation on the customer side. So you kind of have this sophistication on the demand and supply side, creating a very finely tuned but less resilient ecosystem. This kind of has grown over the years because you have every company looking to find those little edges in cost. That's really created this fragile moment, and then you have these big events thrown this out of balance. You have this non-virtuous cycle of demand, over ordering, and now we're seeing the potential for a pretty hard landing as everybody prepares for recession, deflation. And I think many of our clients are already going through that, and we see a pretty tough 12 to 18 months going forward. I wish I could say we're past all these events and we are going to get back to quote unquote normal, but I think you have to kind of lean into this next phase of disruption as well.
My goodness, normal. There's an interesting word. Now, speaking of normal, we have normally very interested people who join in for these SGS Lives. And today's session, I'm sure, is no exception. Look, we have Anna Quinta from London. We have hello from Bahrain, from France, really from all over the world, from Kenya, Congo. My goodness, we have a truly international audience for this truly international topic. And we would like to welcome one and all to this SGS Live. And if you're just joining us, we are talking with SGS experts Jeff Staub and Colin Zimmerink, and we are talking about sales inventory and operations planning, otherwise known as SIOP. And we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this session. If you'd like to leave us a question or a comment, do so in the chat window below. Okay, back to our discussion. Colin, how can we change those methodologies to anticipate the unexpected and be better prepared?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can definitely be better prepared, but as Jeff said, you cannot prepare for every scenario. So what you then use, as mentioned, is what information do we have? What useful information do we have? What leading indicators? And at least prepare for some of the scenarios so you know what to do when. So if you look at the heart of demand and supply chain planning, it requires a proactive measuring of what is happening. And you have to identify for your organization what are those relevant KPIs, what are we going to look at for short-term, medium-term, long-term, and then use your SIOP and your processes and that information, the useful knowledge with all stakeholders. And again, we can talk again about the number of quantity of stakeholders involved. What does that mean? Let's get the data. It's not perfect. I've seen too many organizations. We've seen to look at trying to get perfect data. That's not needed. Once we have the useful knowledge, we assign the roles, we assign the responsibilities. We have an optimized SIOP process where all stakeholders are equal and have the right influence on that process and the outcome. And then you plan, and then you.
You know what, Jeff, I'm going to jump over to you if you don't mind. I would like you to define this for me. Would you say that this is a war on two fronts? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think, Colin was kind of describing what we call the SIOP management operating system there. And I think obviously that has many components that he was kind of cycling through. But I think I would describe it as, three critical components, or maybe a war on three fronts, if you will. Before you get to that core forecasting methodology, we really focus on a resilient foundation. How do you create optionality within your SIOP? And that's really looking at, how do you look at supplier redundancy, vertical integration, inventory strategies, and really looking at different ways to manage the unknown unknowns. So when you built the foundation around inherently more agility, less vulnerability, you have to kind of start to say, okay, what is the cost of that optionality? And then where does it start to become exponential, and looking for the knee in that curve to really push yourself to say, how are we kind of preparing for the broadest set of outcomes that doesn't really drive cost and complexity into the business? Once you go to that, it's really then in the second front, really taking advantage of those stakeholder engagement points. We're always amazed when companies know that there's risk and they see these things coming but can't react. So, your customer interactions, your supplier interactions come in many different forms, and bringing that together in a meaningful way and having the discipline to react to it effectively, both upstream and downstream, is really critical. And third, and certainly not least, is really this control tower aspect. How do you bring together the information in a seamless, meaningful way that formalizes the decision-making across multiple team members, multiple functions? And I think so often you see, I think whereas Colin was going is, you have a lot of hedging, a lot of shifting dates. It really provides confusion in the organization about what we're planning for, how we expect things to happen, and really the discipline to create a scoreboard so that you know where you stand and you can kind of look back and say, where do we need to make improvements on the next go around?
Okay, so Jeff, you said something that kind of piqued my interest, and that is about the third front, digital transformation. If this is in fact sort of critical, how do you see that manifesting for companies?
Yeah, I think digital is without a doubt the only way to really get to a mature SIOP process or integrated business planning process. And I think when I say mature, it's really that kind of, really, managing complexity in your business. I think so often we really see companies not taking advantage of maybe more basic opportunities within SIOP, but certainly digital. And by that, I really mean data availability, data harvesting, eliminating human intervention when you can, and then driving that useful knowledge to the decision makers at the right point in time, at the right fidelity, often kind of near real time or real time data. So I think digital is going to play a huge role here. Obviously, you have plenty of companies like SAP, JDA, Infor, Kinaxis, Logility, Oracle that have ways to digitize your system. But I think it's just hugely critical to not think this is a silver bullet. I think it's really looking at the underlying fundamentals of your SIOP process. How is your organization come together? Are you really tying it to your business strategy and your overall financials? Are you taking advantage of those external facing interactions that I described with your customers and your suppliers to really have two-way flow there? And then I think often we see there's some major steps you can change before you go to that big digital investment piece. But if you want to take it to the next level, once you have the fundamentals in place, that's where digital plays a huge role.
This is just so fascinating for me. I'm going to come back to you, Colin, for a moment.
Sure.
I would like to know how SIOP can be leveraged for greater forecasting accuracy.
Yeah, I would say typically we see it the other way around. We look at organizations getting their data, their historical data, using predictive modeling to get the data right, then start forecasting the various KPIs, the various whatever they would look at on the dashboards. Then that is a factor going into SIOP, and that then with all the other elements of SIOP has a positive results on the business. So it starts with getting the data historical, the data analytics that Jeff just talks about.
Okay, well, if you're just joining us, we are talking about a fascinating topic today with my two SGS experts, Jeff Staub and Colin Zimmerlink, and they are from SGS Mainpoint, a member of the SGS group of companies. So we're talking about sales, inventory, and operations planning, otherwise known as SIOP, and what they can do to help you. Don't forget, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this interview segment. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to leave it in our chat. But right now, I'm going to go back to our discussion. Jeff, I'm coming to you. Is it fair to say that one upset anywhere in your supply chain can disrupt your entire strategy?
I think depending on the magnitude and direction of that disruption, it's the short answer is yes. I think we've seen that. Unfortunately, obviously, SIOP is there to mitigate and dampen the effects of disruption, and often I think you can kind of manage that disruption effectively. But when we have kind of those true black swan events and the amount of volatility, it's difficult. I'm working with a customer right now that uses a lot of nickel. We've seen a 200% price increase and lead time increase since the start of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and that has already began to dissipate. But that's a very real and very deep impact to their business. So certainly can happen. I recall being in industry during the global financial crisis where metal commodities got so expensive, every part we made, we lost more money. So these are the kind of pieces that you really need to have that tight tie back to your SIOP processes to understand how they're going to disrupt the company. And I think it's actually what makes SIOP so daunting is even when you put a lot of work into this, there's always these factors that you can't possibly prepare for, or scenarios that are, slightly adjacent to what you're expecting that drive, the need for real agility, humans to react to and really drive through that range of outcomes. So I think as we see this kind of evolve going forward, it really will become more about a read and react beyond that normal band of scenarios that you plan for. And I think that will help businesses continue to mitigate the risk.
It's so interesting that you say all of the different factors that come in, because my next question is for Colin. And I know that it, encompasses a lot. But as manufacturers were realizing that there's only so much that they could do in getting raw materials and parts, and as well with labor constraints, how do they make the most of what they can do?
Yeah, good question. It starts with realization first. We unfortunately have too many clients don't realize that the SIOP is such an important part. And as such, visiting a client tomorrow that is a medical devices manufacturer, spent tens and tens of millions on automating processes that really didn't work for a certain division. So now we are assisting them in making it work to get the SIOP in place there. So the realization and the importance of good SIOP is a first step. It has to fit into the strategic goal, how we're going to make that happen. Then properly identify where are my bottlenecks in that, what needs to be done, and slowly start addressing them. Yes, a good SIOP will allow for continuous changes, adapting to whatever might happen, whatever might occur. There's still going to be that uncertainty that we talked about. But once you have that in place, the team, again, all those stakeholders will start working together and moving towards a proactive approach towards SIOP. That becomes a different story, but that's really the goal.
So, Jeff, if I want to take it back to the beginning, what kind of clients are looking for this kind of work, the kind of work that SGS Mainpoint can provide? And what are the shortfalls that you are seeing in their current SIOP?
Yeah, great question. I think in reality, very few industries truly get to escape SIOP. But generally, the higher volume, higher SKU proliferation, the more nodes in that end-to-end supplier customer network, you'll see those companies typically the mature ones driving the leading edge of SIOP. I think consumer goods and retail, engineered products, those are probably the ones that you see the most kind of advanced metrics. But right now I'm in a space systems provider client, obviously very low volume. You have life cycles that can be, before you even make one part, up to a decade long. So as you kind of think about that one, you don't have natural competitive forces in your supply chain. SIOP is just as powerful there as it is in where you would expect to see it in some, food and beverage type of environments. I think ultimately, organizations are really feeling the pain over the last few years because they've been in constant firefighting mode. Maybe they've underinvested in the people capability in those functions. And I think anybody that's been surprised by how these changes have manifested in their business strategy, financials, they would typically benefit from this type of discussion.
So this is, we're going to have one more question before we get to our Q&A. And if you're just joining us, we are talking to our experts, Jeff Staub and Colin Zimmerink, and we are talking about helping customers optimize their PSYOP. And actually, that leads me to this question. Colin, on the flip side of the sales inventory and operation planning coin, describe what many manufacturers are doing in truly optimizing their PSYOP.
Yeah, this is going to sound harsh, but unfortunately, we find that too many are not doing much about it. In fact, we see many of our clients using excuses, whether it's pandemic, shortages, blockages, whatever it may be, without really addressing it. So that's not good for the business at all. To answer your question directly, what are people doing to address it? Some are increasing the number of people in PSYOP meetings, throwing more resources at it, or more meetings, or longer meetings, or more data. I just gave you the example where a client spent tens of millions of dollars in ERP systems that don't really bring a solution because the process underneath is not really well defined. Others are hiring experts. It's very hard because then typically those experts are representing a certain group of the stakeholders, as we discussed earlier. So you still don't get that full alignment. So we really see fairly few clients bringing all parties to the table with the right information, the useful knowledge, having the ownerships and the responsibilities defined, and addressing the processes. Too many IT solutions thinking to solve it technically. That's only a next step, really. And when we do see use of information, it's not always useful information used. So in short, if companies are even addressing it all, they're throwing resources at it, sometimes making it worse, not necessarily better.
Well, you know what? This brings us to our Q&A. Now, Jeff, Colin, you guys are okay with a couple of extra questions, right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, let's go with question number 1. And I think this one is going to be for Colin. Colin, let's talk about demand and its impact. There was very high demand in 2020, 2021, from RVs to bicycles, from boats to home electronics and beyond. And then 2022, 2023, there has been reduced demand in some areas. What does that mean for your customers?
Yeah, we talked earlier about how do we predict events like that. And those fluctuations in certain subgroups, subsectors, if you will, are driven by some of the causes for this fluctuation that we talked about earlier. The pandemic was because people wanted the RVs and the bicycles, they wanted to go outside. So there is a certain level of predictability in that. We help our customers trying to identify those based on historical data, some modeling, and then data analytics. And with that in place and a proper PSYOP, they can at least address some of that.
And Jeff, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just coming from a slightly different angle, I kind of look at it, if you start at the demand side, it's, how is that shift going to manifest short and long term? Is this a true shift in demand, or is it a temporary spike? I think COVID and these other factors are interesting because I think some is, accelerating a 10-year trend down to 2 years, like mobility and working, for example, whereas some are truly temporary spikes. So I think it's, the manifestation of what Colin described is really how quickly can we react and at what cost? And I think, we help clients think about, is it a structural investment that we want to put into this? That typically means, building buildings, increasing the number of suppliers, committing to a certain amount of investment to increase our output capability in the example of an RV, or is it a temporary spike that we need to figure out how to take advantage of, where it's much more OpEx? It's how do we go from 3 shifts at 5 days a week to 24/7 production? How much can we kind of squeeze out? How do we reward our workforce for coming in and really delivering in those tough spots? And I think that really kind of shifts the dynamic from a short-term squeeze to respond versus a long-term. And I think Amazon's a great example of this. They really went and put a huge amount of investment to build out their infrastructure to respond. And now they're trying to figure out, hey, what actually happens now. They pause a lot of that construction, and then they'll have to see how this plays out long term. That is kind of a microcosm of what we're seeing across our client base as well.
Wow. You know what? Here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for good news. So, Colin, can you share a success story with me?
Oh, absolutely. Now we have plenty, but let me pick on one very, very recent. And I must compliment the CEO of this company. He really had the vision and the leadership to do it right. He recognized just last year, in relevant to the question, they couldn't build all the trailers. This company makes trailers for the big trucks that are on the road, 18-wheelers. They couldn't deliver everything that they wanted to deliver. Couldn't make everything because of the shortages, as we all know. Great. So he said, well, let's at least optimize the business as a whole. So we worked with his team and all of his team in the different areas, the various stakeholders, to put a true SIOP process together that everybody could get behind. We then took the data. We worked strongly with their data analytics group, their ERP systems, to use all the data in place, optimizing the SIOP process, then deciding the production plans, the inventory, how to utilize labor, even in labor shortages. And this CEO even insisted that he and his people went through those modules and went through the meetings to ensure everybody fully understand it and embraced the changes. And then he actually went in and said, well, let's audit, let's verify and check this every couple of months. A true success story. Company is doing a lot better by making what they actually could make with the limited resources. And they did that as a result of an optimized SIOP process.
Well, we are coming almost to the end, but Jeff, I've got one final question for you. And that is kind of as a wrap up. Let's talk about SGS Mainpoint services in a more broad way. What kinds of questions can companies be asking themselves to be prepared, and how can you help them?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to finish. I think, you mentioned up front, an exhausting 3 years, right? There's some fatigue right now. We've kind of exercised some muscles maybe that we haven't exercised since the global financial crisis. And I think when we talk to our clients right now, it's are we on the other side of this? Do we get a moment to catch our breath? And the short answer is no. I think there's an actually really interesting opportunity forming right now as the Federal Reserve in the States and across the world, we're really committing to fighting inflation. We're seeing some of the congestion in the supply chain start to ease. There's fear of a hard pullout. We're seeing some of the consumer trends shift back to pre-COVID style with going out to eat and the type of experiences that people want to enjoy. So I think right now is, it's really a time to take advantage of the workforce and the capability that's been built up to deal with the last 3 years and to actually take control back of your end-to-end supply chain, lean in forward and say, okay, the last 3 years, we spent all of our time, energy working with suppliers to get product. Now we're on the other side of this thing where we might have accepted a lot of price increases in a deflationary economy, a recession economy. What do we want that to look like on the other side? How do we take back some of that demand power away from those suppliers and really start to shift that balance back into an order that we can live with and sustain longer term? Those are really exciting conversations for us. That's really in our sweet spot of how do you drive that strategic sourcing, planning, manufacturing. So it's going to be a new chapter here over the next 12 to 18 months. I think for the companies that lean into it, the future-proof that supply chain, they're going to be in a great opportunity to really win and take advantage of those changes.
You know what? Jeff Staub, Colin Zimmerink, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about SIOP and SGS Mainpoint and how you can help customers optimize their operations.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having me.
And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us for this very interesting and engaging session about SIOP. If you want to know more, please go to our website at sgs.com and feel free also to continue to leave comments in our chat. We've been so happy to have you here today. I'm PJ Kwong. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.